Stenhouse Jr. says he has a contract with Hayek Motorsports through 2026 and will not join Spire Motorsports in 2026 as announced. And NASCAR says they do not plan to sell the charters for 23rd and front row in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show those really quickly. We've only got one paint scheme to take a look at today, and it's Tony Breidinger's 2025 Tele-Rec scheme that we'll see later this year at Barnesville. Honestly, I think this truck looks really, really good. I love the colors on it overall, and it's pretty cool that Tony Breidinger continues to bring out sponsors. Sure, she might not perform the best on the racetrack every single week, but this car will look really, really good out there. Maybe she'll actually have a good run with this car. Who knows at this point? I think it's a decent car for sure. Pretty nice looking, and good to see she does have a new sponsor for this weekend. I thought it was definitely a solid paint scheme for sure, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Briscoe. Now, last night, of course, Chase Briscoe picked up a second straight Southern 500 win and his fourth career NASCAR Cup Series victory. He's the first driver to go back-to-back in a Southern 500 since 2005 and 2006 when Greg Biffle won those 2 years in the number 16 car for Roush Fenway Racing, or Roush Racing at the time. And then also, he's the first driver to lead 300-plus laps in the Southern 500 since 1971 when Bobby Allison led that many laps. In fact, the last time someone led over 300 laps at Darlington in any race was the 1986 Trans-South 500 when Dale Earnhardt led over 300 laps. Chase Briscoe's been absolutely put up a dominant clinic in this year's Southern 500, put up a well-deserved and well-earned victory. Yes, 30 year, among other things, really became a factor. There's no question about that. But what Chase Briscoe did was absolutely incredible. I think he's definitely a championship threat currently at the moment. I think he's going to have a really good chance to go out there and win the title this year. I think he's been better than Larson as of late, better than all the Hendrick cars like Chase Elliott, Willie Byron, those guys as of late. But congratulations to Briscoe on a dominant run and a well-earned win in this year's Southern 500. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Dutch Grand Prix. Now, before the IndyCar race took place at Nashville and, of course, the Southern 500 took place at Darlington, you had the Dutch Grand Prix from Zandvoort earlier this week. And this race had a lot of chaos with it. You had some mechanical issues that happened throughout the day. You had some contact between Carlos Sainz and I believe also lost Liam Lawson in the race. You also had one of the dominant cars, or one of the strongest cars in the race, that being Lando Norris, running the mechanical gremlins late in the race with around 10 laps to go in the event. He said he started seeing some smoke in the cockpit of his McLaren, and then with around 8 laps to go, the car unfortunately blows up, and he has to stop the car on the racetrack. Had Lando Norris won the race, he would only be 2 points back. With him failing to finish the race, Lando Norris is now 34 points behind Oscar Piastri. On the final restart of the race, Oscar Piastri got a really, really good restart on Max Verstappen, pulled out to about over a 2-second lead, and coming off the corner, Oscar Piastri picks up, I think, his 7th or 8th win of 2025, what seems like his 10th or 11th career Formula One victory, and gets back on the winning track. Oscar Piastri looking really good to win the championship right now. I think it's going to be really tough unless we see Oscar have troubles like Lando did, which we could see reliability issues come into play. Who knows at this point? But I think for him to go out there and win it was a massive deal, a well-earned and well-deserved win. Congratulations to him on winning the race and winning the Dutch Grand Prix, a well-earned and well-deserved victory. Put together an unbelievable run. Good to see him go out there and win this year's race. Congratulations to him on winning the race this year in Zandvoort. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the IndyCar race at Nashville. Now, before the Southern 500 took place last night, you had the IndyCar race at Nashville, of course, the final race of the 2025 year. We already knew, of course, that Alex Poe had already clinched the championship for IndyCar this season. This race had a lot of tops and tips and turns. On lap number 1 of the event, the winner from last week at Milwaukee, Christian Razman, backed it in the outside wall and crashed. And we started seeing a lot of chaos happen, especially in the middle portion of this race. Now, Pat O'Ward and Alex Poe were the two strongest cars early in the event, but around halfway through the race, we would see Pat O'Ward get in the outside wall. Meanwhile, prior to this, you had contact between Dave Malukas and Louis Foster. Malukas running second, of course, rumored to be going to Penske next year in IndyCar. Basically just got hit by Louis Foster. Don't know what Louis Foster was doing. I think that was a really dirty move on Louis Foster's part, especially going in the corner when you are a lap down at this point. You're not racing the leader. You should not be doing that. Then you had Pato getting the outside wall. Then you had Will Power running the issues and problems. But after all the chaos happened, the driver who emerged with the race lead would be Joseph Newgarden. Joseph Newgarden has been having a dismal season so far this year. But then he didn't have the best pit stop. Alex Poe got the lead, but then he got a great run. McLaughlin goes up the track, hits the outside wall. On the final restart of the race, Joseph Newgarden gets an incredible restart, pulls out to a really big lead, and coming off the corner after a dismal season, Joseph Newgarden is able to come off the corner and pick up the win in the IndyCar race at Nashville. What a way to end the season for Newgarden. No, it's not a great way to end. It's a really great way to end the season. Could be a momentum and confidence booster for the program going into next year. Congratulations to Joseph Newgarden on picking up the win. He earned this win, put together a great performance and solid performance as well. Congratulations to him on winning the race. A well-earned and well-deserved victory for Joseph Newgarden to finally go to victory lane after a very tumultuous season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Timmy Hill. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race on Saturday early afternoon, a lot of drivers had really good runs in underfunded equipment, or former veterans had really good runs. Obviously, Corey Day, who drives for Spire, had another really solid run at ninth. You had Trevor Bayne, who made his first Craftsman Truck Series star, get it in a long time since 2023, pick up a solid top 5 finish and put together a fantastic run. But the star of this race, in my opinion, was Timmy Hill. Timmy Hill scores, I believe, I don't know what number top 10 this is for Timmy Hill, but this is one of the best finishes Timmy Hill has ever had in his NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series career. And one of the best races I think he's ever put together in his NASCAR career. To finish inside the top 10 legitimately and run inside the top 10 near the end, it shows he knows how to take care of his equipment and take care of his tires as well. And for him to go out there and pick up a well-earned and well-deserved victory, congratulations to Timmy Hill on getting a top 10 run. Congrats to Trevor Bayne and Corey Day on really good runs as well. Also, congrats to Corey Hammond picking up the win on Saturday. But a really impressive day, a really great run for him. Put together a dominant clinic to get it out there and get it done. Congratulations, Timmy Hill, on winning a well-earned, not winning, but getting a really strong top 10 finish in 8th. That's a great run for an underfunded driver. Good to see Timmy Hill have a well-earned and well-deserved victory. Hope he can be full-time once again in NASCAR in the future. So I think he deserves to be full-time once again in the sport, in the truck series once again, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about iShowSpeed. Now, currently, if you're on someone in the YouTube sphere like myself, you probably noticed that iShowSpeed has been doing his 35 days across America, where he's been streaming for 24 hours straight and does have streams every single day. And on day number 2, he was in Florida and stopped at Daytona International Speedway to do the driver racing experience with Carson Hocevar, currently, of course, drives the number 77 car for Spire Motorsports. It was definitely really funny to watch all the stuff they got up to, and I gotta say, this is a really big deal. And why this is such a big deal? Well, iShowSpeed is one of the biggest YouTubers on YouTube with over 43 million subscribers. I know the stream probably didn't hit like 100K or anything like that, but I think that stream at one point got nearly 50,000 people that were watching, which let's be real, probably more people watching the iShowSpeed stream than probably were watching truck qualifying at that point. And I think it's a massive deal to have one of the biggest creators in YouTube right now, who's doing something really impressive, go out there and do something with Carson Hocevar, who in my opinion has a really big potential to be a superstar in the sport. And I think they know that. That's why they brought Carson Hocevar out there to hang out with iShowSpeed. I think Carson said to me in the media this week that he was trying to scare iShowSpeed, which I find that to be really hilarious and funny. But I think to have iShowSpeed come out to something like this, I think that's absolutely a really huge deal. And I want to see stuff like this going forward. I think we need these drivers to get out there. I'm not sure if this is part of that new driver incentive program that NASCAR has been having this year, but I think this is actually a really huge deal and a really awesome moment for the sport in general to have someone like iShowSpeed show up and do something with Carson Hocevar. So I really hope that we can see more of this stuff going forward. I like seeing this kind of stuff in general, and I think it's great to see nonetheless that we got an opportunity to see iShowSpeed hang out with Carson Hocevar. It was definitely a fun stream to watch and a fun stream to tune in and listen to, especially when it was over there for a couple hours. Really good stuff to see. Good to see iShowSpeed show up to an event in NASCAR especially. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mike Christopher Jr. As it was reported by Race Day Connecticut that Mike Christopher Jr. is expected to make his NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series debut in a couple weeks from now at New Hampshire Motor Speedway and likely the number 62 truck for Halmer Friesen Racing. For those who do not know who Mike Christopher Jr. is, Mike Christopher Jr. is a driver who I believe races in the Wheel and Modified Tour and races a lot of modified cars up in the east coast of the country. And he is also the nephew of the legend Ted Christopher, who won a lot of races in the Modified Tour, also won a lot of races in the NASCAR ARCA East Series back in the day when it was the Busch East Series many years ago, and also made some starts in NASCAR Cup and Xfinity competition as well. I am very interested to see how Mike Christopher Jr. is going to do. I love seeing drivers, unknown guys, get the chance and opportunity, and I know he's won some races up there in the East Coast, especially up in New Hampshire, especially in like Connecticut, Maine, all that kind of stuff, but I really hope he can do a really good job, especially since Homer Friesen Racing, in my opinion, is a very solid and a pretty good organization itself. So we'll see how he can end up doing, if he can perform very, very well with the Homer Friesen Racing team. I've got confidence he will be up there in this event. I think he's going to have a good opportunity. The Homer Friesen Race team's shown some pretty good speed as of late, especially. So I do think they'll have a really solid opportunity to be really, really fast and competitive. We'll see if we can have a really strong run with the program next weekend, in a couple weeks from now, I should say, at New Hampshire with this team. We'll see if he can show up. I think he's got a good opportunity here, and I think he'll show some pretty solid and really, really good speed when we get to the track in a couple weeks from now in New Hampshire. Looking forward to see what he can do with the Homer Friesen Racing team coming up here really soon. A great opportunity to drive the number 62 at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR 25. Now, we all know that NASCAR 25 is coming out on October 14th of this year, so a little over a month away from now at this point, as we've reached September at the moment. Now, there have been some more screenshots, and shout out to the Peyton guy on Twitter who put out some of the screenshots that probably some of you have seen. And taking a look at these screenshots we've seen, I gotta say, from all the screenshots, from all the videos, from everything that's been released, NASCAR released that video where they had a lot of YouTubers like The Iceberg, Cat Bunno, Kamado Gaming. I saw that driving experience event they did as well. Matt Malone was out there. Jeff Avanignano was out there. I think Casey Kerwin I saw was out there doing that event as well. We've been seeing a lot more stuff coming out for NASCAR 25, and I expect a lot of that to heat up as we get closer to the release. There's obviously a lot of questions about when is the trailer going to be released. From what I understand, the trailer is going to be coming at Bristol week, so probably in about 2 weeks from now is when it's going to get released. And by judging by everything I'm seeing, I'm definitely becoming more optimistic about this game. But I want everyone to understand that I'm still remaining cautiously optimistic, because I think that's something we all should be doing at this point, is we shouldn't be over optimistic that this game is going to be a top level game yet. But I'm definitely becoming more confident this is going to be a great game, which I think is something that NASCAR has needed for quite some time, because we have not had a good game in a very long time. The last, I think, solid NASCAR game came out 13 years ago in 2012 with Inside Line. So we've needed a really good game for quite some time, and I hope we can get that game, because it could really attract that younger demographic, which a lot of us YouTubers came in because of the gaming space, and I think it's really important that we do get a game like that that can bring a lot of those younger fans in. I hope there's a good chance of that happening for sure. I think it's really good. This game actually looks solid so far. It looks like a AAA game, which is a huge deal. I think this game could be a very big game for the future of the sport as well. Again, the graphics look pretty good for sure from what some are showing, and there's a lot of things they're still working toward the game, but I like a lot of the things that I've been seeing so far for this game. I really like the future of this game currently at this moment right now. I like what I'm seeing right now for NASCAR 25. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Christopher Bell and Carson Hocevar. Now, if you watched the Southern 500 last night, you probably saw the contact between Christopher Bell and Carson Hocevar. So around lap 140 of the event, Carson Hocevar was kind of running in the middle of the pack in this race, so he did recover to get a solid top 10 finish at the day. Carson Hocevar ends up spinning out and bringing out the caution. Coming on the pit road during that same time, Christopher Bell was trying to lead pit road at that point, and Carson Hocevar came down pit road, and Christopher Bell got a ton of damage on the right front of that car, and Carson Hocevar gets a little bit of damage, but he's able to recover. Meanwhile, Christopher Bell suffers a ton of damage on his car, and unfortunately his chance to go out there and pick up the win is unfortunately over at that point. And after the race concluded in this year's Southern 500, you could tell that Christopher Bell was definitely not happy about the situation. He was very frustrated at not really Carson Hocevar himself, but he's more frustrated at what exactly happened with the 77 team and the communication in that front. Christopher Bell said that you're basically one of the cars that's almost in the back of the pack, especially after spinning out. You're affecting the playoff guys who have an opportunity here to be really, really good and have great runs, and you're affecting my opportunity to have a really strong finish with the damage. I do get Christopher Bell's frustration. I really, really do, because Christopher Bell had a decent run going, but not a great run. But once he got the damage on that car, he never was a really big factor at that point. But at the same time, I think that incident is honestly more on the 20 than the 77. I get it's easy to blame Carson Hocevar for situations on the track, and I've done that quite a bit on this channel, I'll admit that. But I think that Christopher and the 20 team are more at fault for the situation because the car coming in that is coming to pit road, the 77, he's got more responsibilities on the 20 car to me in this case. Because Christopher Bell is the one that's leaving and Hocevar is coming in. Hocevar has the right of way. Even if he spun out earlier, and yes, he's not a playoff guy, it still doesn't matter. He has the right of way coming to pit road. So to me, as much as I understand Bell's frustration in this case, and I get it because he got a lot of damage, and I know he's not blaming Hocevar entirely for it, I think you got to put more of the blame, unfortunately, in this case, on Christopher Bell and not so much on Carson Hocevar because, well, yes, again, he is basically one of the last cars on the lead lap at that point. His responsibility still goes to the car that came out of pit road and leaving his pit stop. Just like the Zane Smith and Bubba Wallace incident during the green flag pit stop, I put more of that on Bubba than I put Zane. The communication could have been better for sure, but I put more blame in that case there. So while I understand his frustration, I think more of the blame once again goes over to Christopher Bell than it does go to Carson Hocevar's team personally, in my opinion. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Romain Grosjean. Now, earlier this week on Friday afternoon, there was a piece that came out from Marshall Pruitt from Racer Magazine talking about Romain Grosjean, who is interested once again in coming back to IndyCar. Romain Grosjean, of course, has not been competing in IndyCar this year in 2025. I think he's been competing full-time in IMSA with the Lamborghini team. I think that Lamborghini program, unfortunately, though, is shuttering or has already shuttered at this point, and they're not racing currently at the moment. Unsure what the plans for that program is currently at the moment for 2026. But in this article, Romain Grosjean expressed interest in wanting to come over and race in IndyCar once again. Now, there's now been a ton of reports out there as of recently that he potentially could be aligned to go to Dale Coyne Racing once again in 2026. Now, he's driven for Dale Coyne Racing in the past. I think he drove for them around 2021 or 2022, and he had some really good runs with the Dale Coyne Racing organization. There has been rumors he could replace Rinus VeeKay, who could potentially be moving on to a better team next season. And Romain Grosjean, in my opinion, he had a decent run in IndyCar his first original run. He did have a chance to win races in early 2022 in the 28 machine. He could have won that race at St. Petersburg. He kind of got screwed there by Scott McLaughlin. He was really good at Barber early in the year. And then it seemed like the momentum was kind of lost in the second half of the season. They just lost a lot of the pace and speed in the second half of 2025, 3, and 22 as well. And I think if Romain comes back, I think this will generally be his last opportunity to be really, really competitive because I think that you don't get as many second chances in the sport, and if you don't do very, very well, you usually don't get that second chance and opportunity, right? But I hope he can do very, very well. So I think it'd be great for the sport if Romain could come in and do a solid and really, really good job for sure. I hope he can have a really solid opportunity, do really good with Dale Coyne. Again, it sounds like the favorite. He is the favorite, maybe for a Dale Coyne Racing entry, which we'll get to here in just a second with the silly season side of things. But I think it'd be really cool nonetheless for him to have a good opportunity once again. Do I think he's going to be a championship contender? No, I don't think he's kind of proven that he's not really a championship contender behind the wheel of an IndyCar at this point. But I think it'd be really great if he can do a really solid enough job to get a good opportunity. We'll see if he can run very, very well. We'll see if he can show the pace and speed to be really, really competitive. And we'll see if he has a good enough opportunity to be very, very competitive with that program. We'll see if he can do very, very well if he does end up at Dale Coyne Racing in 2026. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar silly season. Now, earlier this week, and I believe it was on Friday, Marshall Pruitt put out an article from Racer Magazine in regards to the IndyCar silly season right now at the moment. And it sounds like a lot of big moves are in works for 2026. Now, the big first one we're going to talk about is Will Power. There, of course, was a potential meeting yesterday between him and Roger Penske. Sounds like that's gotten pushed back to today. But there's a lot of rumors out there that in the coming days, we're going to find out that Will Power, more than likely, will not return to Team Penske in 2026. It sounds like that Will Power will not be back with that program next year. And it sounds like Dave Malukas is likely going to the number 12 car in 2026. Despite the fact that, well, yes, Joseph Newgarden did win, Will Power was the strongest driver at Penske, finishing, I believe, in the top 10 of the points by the end of the year. It sounds like they're moving on to bring a younger driver in Dave Malukas to take over the number 12 car next year. So what does this mean for Will Power? If Will Power does, in fact, do not return, there is a lot of talk about him potentially going to Andretti Global in 2026 in the number 26 machine to potentially replace Colton Herta. Rumors are is that Colton Herta may be going to Formula 2 with the Andretti Global organization in the Cadillac program next season in a Formula 2 car. Now, is it official? We don't know at this point, but that sounds like that's what's the direction from a lot of people are saying currently at the moment. Someone else who is rumored, though, for that Andretti Global car is actually Rinus VeeKay. Rinus VeeKay could be in the works for an upgrade going into next year, which I think he's earned an upgrade. He's been really good with Dale Coyne this season. He's put together a strong season. It doesn't sound like he's going to be back with Dale Coyne racing from what a lot of people are saying currently at the moment. Then you have Dennis Hauger. Dennis Hauger has room for the Andretti Global seat for next season, but there's also talk that he might be going to Juncos Hollinger Racing next year, get loaned out for a season. Then depending on what happens to Marcus Ericsson in 2026, where his performance is, he could end up in one of those Andretti Global cars and maybe in the number 28 car next season, or 27 I should say, which I think Hauger's done good enough to move up next year. He's had a really strong and really good season with that program, and I really hope we do get to see Dennis Hauger get to move up next year. But there's some other big movement that's expected, of course, in 2026 as well. There's a lot of talk about Prema having a very unfortunate and uncertain future right now, and there's other teams whose futures could definitely be in question as we do progress through this silly season, but it sounds like some big press releases are coming very, very soon, and some big movement is expected to be happening here in the not-so-distant future with the IndyCar silly season. So we'll see what happens and what moves end up taking place, but it sounds like there's some pretty big moves coming up really soon, and some interesting moves definitely that you want to pay attention to here really, really soon, in my opinion, when it comes to IndyCar as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Nick Sanchez and Sammy Smith. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Portland, we're going to talk about the last corner cutting situation with Connor Zilisch here in just a short little bit. But what triggered a lot of the way for Connor to get a really big advantage was apparently there was some contact between Nick Sanchez and Sammy Smith on the final restart of the event. So going into turn number 1 and turn number 2, I believe Nick Sanchez ran in the back of Sammy Smith and spun him out, and Sammy Smith went from having a potential top 5 finish to finishing, I believe, outside of the top 15 because of that contact. After the race concluded, you had Sammy Smith who actually went up to confront Nick Sanchez, and they had a conversation. You could definitely tell from how the conversation was going. You could definitely tell that Sammy was definitely heated, but there was never any fists thrown. They were just words exchanged, and they both had a conversation. I'll give Sammy Smith a lot of credit right here, right, that he actually wanted to talk to Nick Sanchez instead of being like what Matt Crafton did, where he sucker punched on Nick Sanchez. But I think in this case, I do respect him for going up and actually talking to him about the incident instead of just trying to be like what he did a couple years back, or trying to go to the hospital, trying to get confronted. I think it was Taylor Gray, I'm pretty sure. But I think Sanchez is definitely a little over-aggressive in that situation to me. But again, you had Nick Sanchez who basically kind of said, I'm not really a big fan of dealing with hypocrites, which we all know what happened in Martinsville in 2025, where Sammy Smith just flat out dumped Taylor Gray. And there was a massive wreck that happened, and one of the biggest disasters I think we've seen so far this season, in recent years especially. But I think at this moment right now, I do get why Sammy Smith was frustrated in that case. Even if he's done drivers wrong in the past for sure, I still think Nick Sanchez was a little bit over-aggressive in that situation. And I get that a lot of drivers were doing that throughout the day for sure, especially at the end. I mean, you had William Swalch, who was a literal cannonball near the end, and tried to send it in the corner, just completely messed up and almost screwed Connor Zilisch out of the win in this race. And I do think in general, I think Nick Sanchez is generally a pretty clean driver out there most of the time. Meanwhile, Sammy Smith has had a tendency to be a little over aggressive, but it seemed like the opposite happened in this situation to me. But I do get Sammy Smith's frustration, right? But again, he has a little bit of history and reputation of running into people sometimes. But I do think in this case and situation, I got to put a little bit more blame in this situation on Nick Sanchez. But I do understand why Nick is saying he doesn't have time for hypocrites. It is what it is at this point. Just interesting to see a confrontation between two drivers who've been having pretty solid seasons in Xfinity currently at the moment so far this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AJ Allmendinger. Now, of course, we know that College Racing will have a Ram Truck Series program in 2026, and they're going to have 5 trucks next year that are going to run full-time. But it's unknown who is going to be in the driver lineup for that program in 2026. One driver we do not expect to run full-time in that program next year is AJ Allmendinger, who is still going to be in the number 16 car once again for the 2026 season. But there has been some talk recently about whether AJ Allmendinger could potentially drive a college truck at any point in the 2026 year. And one of the races a lot of people talking about, and shout out Taylor Kitchen for being there, getting the support out there. But as she reported, it sounds like he's interested in going to St. Petersburg, and there is a lot of talk about maybe him running the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg during the same weekend. Of course, the Truck Series will be racing on the streets of St. Petersburg in 2026, and AJ could be one of the drivers in that program for next year for that event. Now, what's really interesting is that you have the race at Circuit of the Americas. Depending on what time that race takes place, whether that's a mid to late afternoon event, there is a possibility he could run that event depending on when the qualifying and all this stuff takes place. Because obviously he's likely not going to run the Kaulig Xfinity program next year, more than likely. So could he do that? I would love to see that. I'd love to see some Cup guys go out there and run that St. Petersburg event. But I also love to see some IndyCar drivers go and run the event as well. Some have suggested Scott McLaughlin. Some have suggested Connor Daly. Some have suggested even people like Alex Palou to go out there and run that event. And I think it'd be really cool to see like an Alex Palou or Scott McLaughlin go out and run a Truck Series race. But I'm very interested to see what the College Truck lineup is going to be as, and I actually have a video coming out on that tomorrow, talk about that programs, where I think things are going to go, who I think will end up in that program next year more than likely. But I think there is a chance AJ could at least make a few select starts in that program next year for sure. Again, we know he's not going to be full-time next year with the program, but at least we know he'll maybe make a few starts. Who knows at this point? But I think for AJ, it'd be really awesome if he could get the chance and opportunity to make a run at the team and make a run with the organization at St. Petersburg. I think that'd be pretty fun for something like that to happen. I think Kaulig would definitely let him do it for sure. But again, I do think he's got a contract with Chevrolet right now, so that is something to kind of look at as well. You're not going to see a lot of the Kaulig drivers that are signed with Chevrolet go out there run that event, but I think there's definitely a possibility of something like that happening in the future. Again, there's a chance we could see Will Brown maybe run that truck race if he ever decides to come back after how bad his luck has been so far. And you think about other drivers who we could see, like a Brett Moffitt, like a LeVar Scott, perhaps, who could be with that program. Obviously, Butterbean Queen's name has been linked. Daniel Dye's probably going full-time with that program. Who knows at this point, but I'm very interested to see who will go into that program next season, and we'll see what happens. But AJ could at least make a start with that program at some point in 2026, maybe at St. Petersburg. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Zandvoort. Now, there was a report that came out from Adam Stern earlier this week, right before the race took place in IndyCar at Nashville, that apparently there was some talk and conversations about maybe some racing in the USA, like NASCAR and IndyCar potentially racing in Zandvoort in the future. Now, obviously, of course, we know that it's very unlikely at this point that Formula One will be returning to Zandvoort in 2026, which is a shame considering I think the racing at Zandvoort, despite the fact it's really hard to pass, I think the racing's actually been really solid as well. But some of the organizers from that area, from the Netherlands, are very interested in hosting a NASCAR race in Zandvoort. Now, obviously, NASCAR is not going to have an international race in 2026, with them not going to Mexico City next year. There was talk about the lower series going to Circuit Gilles Villeneuve and racing in Canada in 2026. That, of course, is not happening at the moment, so we might be waiting until 2027, though Ben Kennedy did say recently that that's a major priority that they have right now, is to get an international race once again in 2027. I think it'd be really cool down the road, because I don't think it'll be till 29 or 2030 for a race out there in the Netherlands. But I think going to Europe has to be one of NASCAR's goals in the future. And I don't have an issue with that. The only countries I really would have an issue is like Saudi Arabia going there. I get you would get a lot of money for going to that track, that one rumor track they're working on that will host a Formula One event in a couple years from now. But I really don't want to see a race happening out there at that point. But I think Zandvoort would be a really good track, and it has NASCAR aesthetic things. You got that banking that happens up there, I think in turn number 4 or 5, I'm pretty sure. And there's definitely some opportunities to make some moves. And with these cars in particular, there's going to be opportunity to make some really, really big moves and go out there. You don't see a lot of banking like we at road courses like we saw at Zandvoort. And I think it'd be really cool for Zandvoort to get the chance and opportunity to host a NASCAR race in the future. I think it'd be a really solid track for that for sure. I think it would absolutely be a very solid opportunity for a really good event. I think the racing actually would be really strong and really good there, and I think it'd be really good for NASCAR to expand their horizons and go to different parts of the world, especially in race. So I really hope in the future we get something like that, where we do race in a country like the Netherlands, for example. We do get a race at Zandvoort in the future. I think it'd be really awesome and really exciting nonetheless, and I hope it happens where we do get a race at a track like Zandvoort in the future. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if we do get a race in Netherlands. We'll see if that happens. I think it'd be a great track for racing in particular, and would be some exciting stuff definitely to see if we could get an event like that out of the track very soon, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the final corner on the final restart at Portland International Raceway. Now, obviously, if you watch a NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Portland, Connor Zilisch absolutely put up a massive dominant clinic in the event where he led 70 of the 78 laps. But in the late race of the event, some controversy arose. Now, on the previous restart, the reason Connor Zilisch actually lost the lead originally was because Austin Hill got a really big push from Connor Zilisch's teammate Carson Quaffle. And then going into the corner, Williams Walsh just flat out completely loses it and dive bombs the corner and runs into Connor Zilisch. And Connor does the thing he's supposed to do where he goes to the A-frame area, which you're supposed to go to every time, and goes to the A-frame area and does it correctly. He has some damage on the right rear, but he only drops back to second position and runs down Austin Hill. But then there's a caution that comes out for Jack Perkins, who runs into the grass. On the final restart of the race, Connor Zilisch gets a much better restart as Austin Hill goes up the racetrack, nearly puts Connor Zilisch into the outside wall. And going down the straightaway, Connor Zilisch would unfortunately miss the corner and go right across the area. But he does what he's supposed to do correctly and goes through the A-frame area, and he's able to get the race lead and pull out to a really solid advantage over Williams Walsh. He pulls out to a pretty big lead and comes off the corner, picks up his 8th Xfinity win in 2025 and his 9th career NASCAR Xfinity Series win. Now, the controversy arises because of him cutting that corner, which Connor did admit that he did cut the corner. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people saying, oh, Connor's win should be taken away. Connor Zilisch should not get the win for this race. And I completely disagree with that. Did Connor Zilisch miss the corner? Yes, 100%. Did he probably do it intentionally? He might have missed it intentionally, but you could tell he was actually trying to break in the corner. But he knew he had a backup plan in case if people ran in, which was definitely possible going into that corner of how chaotic it was. And look, the only reason it looked like Connor Zilisch got a bigger advantage that he did, because you don't have to stop there, which I think some people were talking about. Maybe he should have stopped, and I don't know at this point. Maybe he could, who knows? But Connor Zilisch went through that area and gained time because everyone got spun out behind him. If you actually look at the replay and the incident that took place behind him, Sammy Smith ends up getting spun out. And by the way, none of those drivers that went behind him, Austin Hill, Christian Eckes, Nick Sanchez, I think it was, and Williams Walsh, none of those drivers that missed a corner actually did the penalty area. Now, I will say this, Austin Hill was actually trying to do it. Some thought he was trying to wreck Christian Eckes. I think he's actually trying to do the penalty area personally. Maybe he was, who knows. But I think that, to me, I think what they did was more egregious than what Connor Zilisch did. At least Connor actually followed the rules and the correct procedure. And I saw people trying to say, we should basically take the win away from him. I disagree. And I think he earned the win. He earned it fair and square. To me, I get why it's a controversy, but to me, I really understand why people are upset with him. So I think he absolutely did the right thing. He did the correct procedure that you're supposed to. I guess some people get upset about things like this, but to me, I don't understand why people are angry. I think he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He followed the correct procedure, and he did what he was supposed to do on the track. He earned the win fair and square, and if he shouldn't have ever really been in that situation in the first place to begin with, he dominated the race, and there's no reason he should have been put in that position where he had to deal with a bunch of idiots wrecking behind him and a bunch of cannonballs happening on the racetrack at the end, because he was going to win the race regardless. There's no question about that. He was easily going to win that race and that event as well. To me, I think it's nonetheless very interesting for sure, and we'll see what happens down the road for Connor Zilisch. Again, I know he kind of used that, but we'll talk about this. 13 top fives in a row, 8 wins this season. I think there's a good chance he'll get a couple more this year. I don't think he breaks the record for 13. I think Kyle Busch has a record with 13 wins, but I think 10 wins is very possible. He's never been to Gateway. I think he's going to have a good car at Gateway, though. To me, though, I think that people are getting a little bit worked up over this situation. I get why some are upset about it, and people want the rules to be officiated correctly, but I don't think he fully cheated. He did what he's supposed to do and follow the rules, unlike other drivers who missed that intentionally and didn't even try to make the corner, and yet they got no penalties for it. So if they don't get a penalty, you can't penalize Connor Zilisch, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the championship format once again. Now, obviously, we have talked about the championship format a lot on this channel over the course of the last couple years, especially because there's been a lot of controversy around the championship format and how we decided. Now, currently at the moment, of course, we have a one-race championship currently at the moment with the championship format. You have the knockout elimination rounds, and then you have one race to determine the champion where the driver crosses the finish line first. Those 4 drivers ends up going to victory lane. But that has caused a lot of controversy because a lot of the uncertainties, a lot of things that can happen in a single race. And we have some drivers who have their opinions on the championship format. And we have a couple guys who we now know for sure are in favor of a full season format. And one of those is Christopher Bell. Christopher Bell says he's in favor of a 36 race championship. He says that we should have 36 races to determine a champion, and that is the best way to crown a champion in this sport because you have 36 opportunities to make moves, and you have time to make it up, and one race is not enough to determine a champion, which I 100% agree with Christopher Bell on that. Christopher Bell is 1,000% correct, and I think Bell, he knows he's got a really good opportunity to win the championship with the race the way things are lined up for the playoffs this year, but 36 races, in my opinion, would be the best way to crown a champion. Chris Buescher did not make the playoffs this year, also spoke to media earlier this weekend, and he's absolutely 100% in favor also of a full season format. And I think he shares sentiment of many drivers in the sport. Now, Jesse Love, he had an interesting take on Twitter where he said we should either have a one-race championship or a 36-race championship, which, again, we can't do a one-race championship. Personally, I think 36 races is the way to go, on my opinion. I think he actually probably prefers a 36-race championship or how many races Xfinity has because he's probably going back there next year. Who knows at this point? But the driver we know for sure that's in favor of a playoff system in some way, shape, or form is Joey Logano. Joey Logano says that the only reason we're having conversations about changing the format is because of the fact that he won the championship in 2024. Also says that if you didn't perform well in the few races of the playoffs, I'm sorry, you deserve to lose if you especially get a head start. And I 1,000% disagree with Joey Logano on this. Yes, you're trying to say that if someone has a few bad races all year long, they deserve to lose the championship after being really, really good. I'm sorry, that's a really, really bad take, especially if you were mediocre like Joey Logano was last year. And I get that Alex Bowman got disqualified and all that stuff, but Logano ran not that good last year. Now, Logano also did say, like with him being on the panel, he says that if in different playoff formats or championship formats, even with like the full season, Logano says he is a four-time champion. I don't think people have an issue with how many championships that he has. I think the biggest issue we have right now is the fact that how Logano won the championship and the fact that we have a one-race championship where a lot of things can go wrong in that single race that costs a driver. A team can hit on a setup at a racetrack that's not been great all year, and they can win the championship. That's what the controversy is. Most fans, even fans of the playoff format that I have noticed, are not a fan of the one-race championship and want change for that type of championship. And I think that's the issue, right? And Logano's basically been in favor of one-race championship, which I completely disagree. I think a one-race championship is not the way to crown it. I think if you're going to have a compromise for a championship format, I think a 10-race chase would actually be the only other way to go. I think the knockout round system personally needs to go. I think 10 races to crown a champion would be great. I also think the other things I've kind of suggested is we should not have winners get in the playoffs. I think, not winners. Drivers getting one win should not crown you a spot in. No offense to Austin Dillon. Austin Dillon did not deserve to make the playoffs this year. Probably no offense to SVG either. Yes, he got 4 wins, but he wasn't great throughout the majority of the year, which is not surprising because he's not amazing at ovals right now. And then Josh Berry, no offense to him. Josh Berry probably should not have made the playoffs this year either. And guys like Chris Buescher, Alex Bowman, and probably Ryan Preece should have made it this year to the playoffs at this point. But I digress. But I think there are absolutely reasons why we need to change the championship format. Logano, again, he's going to support the system he likes no matter what. He probably likes the system because he gets to do what he wants to do, which is fine and understandable at this point right now. But to me, on a personal front, I think I disagree with Logano on a personal front here. I just don't agree with him. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to me. And personally, I can't agree with Logano on the system. I think we need major changes and overhauls in the system currently at the moment. I really hope we do get these overhauls in the future. And I think there's major changes that do need to be made to the championship format currently at the moment. I hope those changes come soon. So I think it'll be the best for the sport if we can get changes to the championship format. I hope we do get those changes really soon, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about the 2011 Racing Spire Motorsports NASCAR lawsuit once again. As we have gotten some new updates in regards to the 2011 and Spire Motorsports NASCAR lawsuit over the weekend. So let's go back to the beginning of the suit. So of course, there's been a lot that's happened this lawsuit in recent weeks. Obviously, back in October of last year, 2011 and Front Row, of course, did not sign the charter agreement going into the playoffs, and then they sued NASCAR on antitrust claims. They filed for a preliminary injunction initially. They lost that initial preliminary injunction at the end of last year. Then, of course, they filed for another preliminary injunction. They had a new judge come in, with Judge Kenneth Bell coming in for the lawsuit, and then he granted a preliminary injunction in December where they would be charter teams for the 2025 season. As expected, a couple weeks later, NASCAR appealed that preliminary injunction. They had the hearing in May, and then the judges and all the people on the appeals panel overruled that preliminary injunction that Kenneth Bell had written, and 2011 Front Row would end up losing their charters at that point. Then, of course, it filed for another preliminary injunction, and of course, at the time, they lost their appeal at that point, after the appeal. Then they filed for another preliminary injunction, and we're now at this point where we've reached the point of the new preliminary injunction. Now, Judge Kenneth Bell did say earlier this week, or last week, I should say, on Thursday, after they had their hearing, which the hearing got very, very nasty very, very quickly, and it sounded like a lot of things kind of didn't get physical at that point, but judging by Judge Kenneth Bell's reaction of the situation, he did not seem very happy how the teams reacted in court, and he said when we do get the trial on December 1st, which it sounds like from what Judge Kenneth Bell said, it sounds like we're going to trial in about 3 months from now, which it could get a lot more uglier as time goes on. Now we reach what's happened the last couple days. As I mentioned, Judge Kenneth Bell sometime later this week, more than likely sometime late in the week, because today with it being Labor Day, I think the offices are unfortunately closed at this point, so we're not going to get an update from the teams. But we've had some new things come out as of late. According to what was reported by Jeff Gluck initially and Bob Pockris as well and Jordan Bianchi, NASCAR has told the courts in a filing they say they will not sell the 2011 in Front Row Motorsports charters for 2025 or 2026 currently at the moment. They will not sell the Stewart-Haas Racing charters. Now, the teams have rebutted the case currently at the moment by saying that we still should get their preliminary injunction if NASCAR does not sell the charters, so we can't continue being competing as charter teams. Now, NASCAR also did say in their filing as well that if 2011 in Front Row Motorsports do in fact end up winning the lawsuit altogether, they do have the opportunity to get their charters back for the 2026 season. But if they do lose the lawsuit altogether, and there's a chance that the teams could lose this lawsuit because they're not sure who's going to win the lawsuit at this point, there is a very good chance and possibly they'll be able to they will lose their charters if they do lose the lawsuit, and NASCAR can sell those charters at that point. At least NASCAR is going ahead and not selling them. And I think that's something very important right here. Because if NASCAR had said that they were going to sell the charters, boy, oh boy, that would have gotten really ugly. Because there was talk about NASCAR selling the 2011 in Front Row Motorsports charters. There was a lot of conversation around that NASCAR was going to do that. So what this tells me is that NASCAR is likely going to put these charters into an escrow account, at least for now. And then basically they're going to get rid of those charters if they do, and of course, end up winning the suit. To me, especially after some of the evidence came out, I think that they had really no option but to not sell those charters. It would have been a really, really bad look on NASCAR's part. You have had a lot of teams that have been really, really frustrated about that, and a lot of things could have happened. Now, obviously, if 2011 and Front Row do in fact win their lawsuit, number one, they will get their charters back and they'll be able to keep their drivers, because there's been a lot of talk about that, right? That guys like Tyler Reddick could walk and go to other teams. Bubba Wallace, who does have a contract with 2011, he's got also a contract where he has to have a charter clause in that contract right now. He's got a contract next year with 2011, but obviously, of course, those could be broken, especially if he doesn't have a charter, which is something that could hold those drivers back from staying for the organization long term. Same thing goes to Riley Herbst. Same thing goes to Zane Smith, as Jordan Bianchi has reported. Same thing goes to Riley Herbst, and I believe Corey Heim also is affected by this as well. Some drivers may be able to stick around, who knows at this point. If they do end up losing the lawsuit, the teams end up losing, however, there's a very good chance and possibility that we could see them basically go out of business, leasing cut. Now, Front Row will have a truck series program. From what I understand, there's likely going to be 3 trucks next year. From what a lot of people are saying, Taylor Gray can end up over there next. There's a lot of talk about that right now. But then you might have to see some other drivers maybe move to different organizations going into next season. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the remainder of the lawsuit, right? Because I think it's going to get a lot more ugly as time goes on. But at least we know for sure that it's been confirmed that they are not going to sell the charters, which I think is really important. If the teams do win the lawsuit altogether, though, which again, I said this already, it's very likely they could win the lawsuit as well. What will happen is there's going to be a lot of things that are going to change. Number one, You're going to see ISC sold off by NASCAR more than likely. You're also going to probably see the DOJ get involved and investigate what's been going on with NASCAR. And then, of course, you also will see ARCA likely be sold off, and there's some other things that are probably going to get sold off as well. Not sure exactly what else will get sold off at this point, but there's going to be a lot of things that are generally going to change with the sport if, of course, 2011 and Front Row do, in fact, win the suit. If they lose the suit, those teams probably go out of business, and those drivers will be in jeopardy. If, again, NASCAR, like I said, those said they will potentially maybe sell them back. Who knows at this point? NASCAR could also have extra charters. There's been rumors that Junior Motorsports could get one of those charters in the future. Who knows at this particular moment in point, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this lawsuit going forward. I think it's going to get a lot more ugly before it gets better at this point, and I think that regardless who wins the suit, it's going to be an ugly situation. I don't really see any winners coming out besides the lawyers in this case. It's not a situation that I think a lot of us are a big fan of at this point covering, but we got to cover it every time it comes out. A lot of things are coming out at this point, and we'll see what happens with the sport in the future, depending on what happens with the suit. But trust me, it's going to get more ugly before it gets better. I don't think a lot of fans are ready for that when it comes to getting uglier, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, Javon, to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, earlier this week, Jordan Bianchi from The Athletic had reported about potential drivers who could replace Justin Haley in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. One of those rumors was Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, obviously, there's a lot of talk about Justin Haley's uncertain future currently at the moment with the Spire Motorsports organization. Despite the fact that Justin Haley's had some decent runs as of recently, it doesn't seem like the heat is dropped off from Justin Haley at the moment, and there's a very realistic chance he will not be back with the program in 2026. Like I mentioned, one of the drivers who was linked over that program, according to Jordan Bianchi, was actually Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He said that Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s name hasn't mentioned as a potential possibility for the number 7 car in 2026. The reason is because of connection that Spire and the Clausen Marshall team have with the ownership group over there. They share some of the same sponsorship as well, and that's a big reason why some were linking him over that program. Plus, some thought if he goes over to Spire Motorsports next season, he can perform very, very well. Well, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. went on SiriusXM NASCAR radio a couple days ago on Friday afternoon and spoke to Pete Pistone and Mike Bagley as well on the morning drive. And he says he has a contract with Hayek Motorsports for the 2026 season and very likely will not be joining Spire Motorsports next year. Now, I want to emphasize something very, very important really quickly. Just because you do have a contract with an organization does not guarantee that you are going to be with that program for the next year. Prime example, Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie actually did have a contract. It still has a contract with Spire right now for the 2025 year and was supposed to drive the number 7 car for the 2025 season in the Cup. However, that contract got taken out before the end of the year even began and got bought out technically by Rick Ware Racing for a little bit, ended up going over to Rick Ware Racing for select races. Granted, he is going to finish his season with Spire in 2025. Not sure what his future is for 2026. He could go back Cup racing next year, knows at this point, but there is things can change. Now, let's say if Stenhouse does, in fact, right now end up going over to Spire Motorsports next year. I think it would be a slight upgrade over Justin Haley, but not a major, major upgrade. I've already said this from the get-go with Justin Haley, though. I don't think Justin Haley should be dropped from Spire Motorsports. I get that Justin Haley's not been as flashy as Michael McDowell and Carson Hocevar this season, but let's be real. There's been times where Justin Haley has looked a little bit better than Carson Hocevar and Michael McDowell. And let's not forget that there's been things that have happened to Justin Haley this season where things kind of went out of his control. His crew chief got fired. Rodney chose 9 races in the season. His car chief got bought out by the 54 team and Joe Gibbs Racing at the middle portion of the year. And the pit crew that he had at the beginning of the season, they basically got taken over by the 5 team for the remainder of the year. And he got Kyle Larson's original pit crew because that pit crew wasn't doing spectacular, and Larson got Haley's pit crew that has been exceptional this year. So I can't really blame Justin Haley for the bad performances. Has Haley done amazing this year? No, absolutely not. But it would be incredibly foolish if Justin Haley was to be let go from the organization just based off exactly what happened here. It would make no sense to me to let go of Justin Haley at this point. But we know Spire Motorsports is very, very impatient, and they want things to be up to speed very quickly, and they want their drivers to be instantly performing. And I think that it would be, again, very harsh, in my personal opinion, very unfair to let go of Justin Haley this quickly, and I think he gets another, personally, should get one more year with the program. But business doesn't work like that. And obviously, if you have a guy like Kyle Busch who could, because I think if you have a guy like Kyle Busch on the free agent market, then you go for him. The issue is the drivers that are potential candidates. Daniel Suarez. Look, I like Daniel Suarez. I know it sounds like I don't, but I like Daniel Suarez quite a bit. The problem is Daniel Suarez isn't going to move the needle for you. Yes, he's had a couple top 10s recently. He's had 6 top 10s this year and only 2 top 5s. He just hasn't performed exceptionally well with Trackhouse Racing, and I think for Daniel Suarez, it would suit him a lot better to go down to Xfinity. Now, let's say, though, Justin Haley does get let go from the 7, and they put Stenhouse behind the wheel of that car. There is a chance Justin Haley could go to the 47, which would be very interesting if he went over there, because I think that'd be a downgrade from Spire right now, but that's in the Hendrick camp. It would make some sense for sure. I also think Daniel Suarez, if Stenhouse does go to the 7, however, I think Suarez could actually end up in the 47 because he does bring sponsorship to the table with that program, and that's something they're really looking for at this point. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens, though, with the situation with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Again, I just feel like it would be a dishonor service to Justin Haley if you get rid of him. Again, I think he deserves one more opportunity. Again, he's not been amazing this year. I completely understand that. But at the same time, you got to give him another year and another opportunity to prove himself. It would be, again, incredibly foolish if you just dropped Justin Haley this quickly. It wouldn't make sense to me personally, and I think you got to give him one more year to see what he can do. If he struggles next year, fine. If you want to make a move then, that is perfectly okay and perfectly understandable at that point. But again, you got to give him one more year to see what he can do, because I think he deserves at least one more shot and one more opportunity to really, really prove himself. And again, if he struggles at that point, then get rid of him if he doesn't perform great. But you got to give him one more year to do better, because it's just not fair to cut him this early. And I don't see Suarez. Stenhouse maybe is an upgrade a little bit, but I don't think Suarez is an upgrade. I don't think Suarez is going to put up performances. I think the 7 car just isn't an amazing car right now. So I really hope Haley gets another year and opportunity. We'll see what happens with Stenhouse, though, going to next year. I think there's a good chance he stays with the Hayek team next year. There's also a chance he can move on. Who knows at this point? We'll see what happens going into next year with the silly season side of things, and we'll see if maybe some changes happen here really soon with the Spire Motorsports team. So, that is going to today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. List description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. likely not going to Spire right now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about NASCAR saying they're not going to sell the 2011 in front row charters at this time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's any other major news that breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow, we are going to have a video talking about the Colleague Racing Truck Program, talk about some candidates for that potential program as well. Then, of course, on Wednesday, we'll have a NASCAR news video more than likely, and we'll have Xfinity race picks for Gateway. Then Thursday, we'll have Cup race picks for Gateway and the paint scheme video as well. Then, of course, on Friday, we'll have a NASCAR news video as well. We might do a reaction to Xfinity qualifying as well. Who knows? Saturday and Sunday, we might be doing a silly season update on Saturday for cars get on track. Who knows at this point? And then on Sunday, of course, we'll have the cover review for Gateway, and we'll have the starting lineup video as well. Then Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video. We got a lot of content dropping this week. Got people like Haley Deegan, Shane Gisborne, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Paul Walsh, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Zafron, Dodge Ram, Will Brown, Cam Waters, Brock Feeney, Jack Perkins, Connor Zilisch, Jr. Motorsports, Daniel Suarez, Ross Chastain, Carson Quaffle, all the good stuff we'll talk about on the channel in the coming days and coming weeks as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.